I would like to say welcome to my YouTube channel. My name is Theodora Battle. I am currently a graduate that attends the Grand Canyon University. Today, I have decided to record this video because I wanted to specifically address principles of Arizona's language development for English language learners. So before I begin, the question is, what are English language learners? An English language learner, commonly known as ELLs, are students that don't typically speak English at home. Their first language could consist of various languages such as Spanish, French, for an example. Typically, they speak that on a regular basis with their friends and family. In the state of Arizona, in order to accommodate those students, there are specific principles and guidelines that educators must follow in order to ensure that students are provided with adequate service. So, in order to identify students as an English language learner, there are 2 steps associated with the process. So, students receive a home language survey as well as an English language assessment. The home language survey identifies students who may need English development services specifically based upon the degree of English language exposure. So those students are typically not exposed to English on an everyday basis. So you never know what language barriers they may have currently. The English language assessment, on the other hand, it monitors the student language proficiency and confirms the student's language status. So in order to advance students based on their language barriers, we have to first identify their language proficiency. So in the state of Arizona, school districts and charter schools use a home language survey for students enrolling into their school for the first time. Students with a primary home language, on the other hand, are assessed for English proficiency. They are assessed in grades 2nd through 12th, and they're given assessment based off of written and verbal exams. And while they're in kindergarten and first grades, they're only given a verbal exam. So when you think about language, you have to be able to think about accommodations to accommodate those language barriers that are associated with students' English proficiency. 4 specific categories. So you have presentation, responses, the setting, timing, and the schedule. All of that are, important things to consider when placing students in the correct area so that they can advance in their academics. So when it comes to presentations, some accommodations for students, you have to keep in mind presentation is the actual visual. So you can give a visual based off text, lecture, and videos. These accommodations can vary from books, materials that have large print, visual clues that can be typically color coordinated. Students can use audio books or a closed caption on videos. Those specific accommodations allow students to access information in various ways other than the standard visual or auditory meaning, as well as change the way the instruction, direction, and information is being presented to the audience. Another accommodation as far as students' responses, you can utilize speech-to-text softwares, oral dictate responses, such as a digital recording. This will simply allow students to complete assignments and assessments through various other types of verbal and written responses. Another characteristic for the accommodation category is the setting. So typically students that have language barriers, you want to be mindful of student placement in the classroom, as well as their testing in specific locations. Teachers must focus on the timing and the scheduling for students. So and classroom, those students that typically have language barriers, they can receive extended time to complete their tasks or assignments, frequent breaks, or a short testing session. This will allow students to change periodically and allow them to accept change, because with that language barrier, it can be challenging for most students, as well as it allows the assignments to be broken down into smaller portions. Assignments being broken down into smaller portions allows students that have language barriers to be able to pick up on those language concepts that teachers are really wanting them to typically pick up on within a great period of time. So next, I want to briefly discuss different instructional program models that are associated with English language learners. So different language models can begin with bilingual. It can start off with sheltered English instruction, structured English immersion, as well as ESL. So a traditional bilingual education, English language learners typically receive academic instruction in their first language as part of their everyday activities. And for the remainder of the day, they typically receive ESL taught traditionally with the focus of language. So whatever language, English specifically, that they're trying to gain, they are receiving that through that program. As far as the ESL, students are typically pulled out of their classes, and they're placed into a separate classroom setting for typically can be between 3 to 10 hours a week in small groups. The ESL instructors focus on specific language development for those students. Also, for content-based ESL students, they receive instruction from ESL teachers that provides instruction that is based off of their proficiency level. And students are able to focus specifically on content, subject matters, and vocabulary that is being discussed in their courses. Sheltered English instruction, on the other hand, is the academic content, where students are able to focus on the content which promotes that English language development. And lastly, you have the English immersion. So this concept is taught through English content. Students receive it in their first language, and they may use their native language as well to clarify, to make sure that they're actually saying the right words when comparing it to English content. So no ESL instruction is provided in that specific model as well. So next, I would like to transition over to a different type of approach. Now we're going to discuss the 4 principles of Arizona's language development. So in Arizona, all educators share the responsibility for promoting the success of English learners. So this has been placed into 4 principles. The 4 principles: number 1, asset based off behaviors and expectations. Number 2 is integrated instruction in disciplinary language and content. The 3rd principle, it targets an explicit language instruction. With the last principle is assessment, monitoring, feedback. So we're going to go back to that first principle, which is based off of the behavior and expectations. So as English language learners, there are programs that are specifically designed to align students with behavior and expectations that provide them with opportunities to support them to ensure that they are culturally accepted and available to receive the information that they need to expand their language barriers. Educators are able to identify their students' home language and figure out ways to improve their English proficiency over time by supporting them with social emotional health and development opportunities and engagement in their classroom. The student agency for educators, they provide opportunity to those English language learners to show that they're able to master specific components to the lesson. It also reinforces a growth mindset because as an English language learner, there are so many barriers that are associated with it that you want them to always feel encouraged to expand their learning ability. So when you think about the integrated instruction principle number 2, in the disciplinary language and content, educators share this responsibility by allowing students to integrate language and literacy development with their content learning. Educators help their students develop disciplinary content knowledge, language, and autonomy. They're able to differentiate disciplinary language instruction using the English language proficiency standards. A development of the student agency by educators, it provides choices. They can provide their students with choices to expand their learning ability by different strategies and opportunities to demonstrate their mastery. Through this second principle, students will develop a sense of voice, okay? They will gain their confidence and self-determination as they begin to expand their learning ability to that specific content that they are learning about. So moving on to principle number 3, the target and explicit language instruction. So explicit language instruction is a critical component of education because it supports the English language learner students in developing a discourse practice that they need in order to be able to engage in the rigorous academic such as math, science, social studies, English language arts. Educators use their language proficiency standards with this content material to actually teach language. It creates opportunities for students to use language and reflect on their understanding. And so a great way to use this type of principle is to encourage independent learning by teaching effective strategies for learning languages. Students must be taught strategies to ensure that their confidence, their voice is heard, and they are self-determined to expand their knowledge. And lastly, associated with principle 4, you have assessment, monitoring, and feedback. So districts and schools use English language proficiency to diagnose tools. Formative assessment practices and summative assessments are utilized to measure the English language proficiency of students throughout the academic school year. A student agency by educators to ensure that they can expand the students' knowledge. They can create pathways to learning English language learner students, opportunities for self-direction. Teach them how to maintain meaningful feedback. And I would like to say thank you for taking the opportunity to look at my video as I discuss the principles and the importance of English language learners' proficiency in education. Again, my name is Teodora Battle.